Everyone, this is Kokila God on behalf of National Board for Quality Promotion NBQP-QCI. I would like to welcome you to this webinar on appropriate communication in medical healthcare in association with Shankara Eye Hospital, Bangalore. This is Kokila God on behalf of National Board for Quality Promotion NBQP-QCI. I would like to welcome you to this webinar on appropriate communication in medical healthcare. This is 1 hour and 30 minutes training program, Shankara Eye Hospital, Bangalore. This is Kokila God on behalf of which includes 30 minutes question answer session. Here I would like to request you to please write the name of the organization you are associated with while asking the question. However, we'll try to give the answer to your all queries. In case we are not able to take all the questions, we'll get back to you through email. While asking the question, the faculty for this training program is Mr. Gokul Ratkonda, Psychologist and Research Associate, Shankara Academy of Vision, Shankara Eye Hospital, Bangalore. We are not able to take all the questions. And the moderator of this training program is Dr. Kaushik Murli, President, Medical Administration, Quality and Education, Shankara Eye Hospital. Before we start this session, here is a brief introduction about Quality Council of India. And the moderator of this training program is QCI, established under cabinet decision in 1996. It was formed in January 1997. Before we start this session, the mission of QCI is to lead national-wide quality movement in India by involving all the stakeholders. Established under cabinet decision in 1990. QCI is registered as a non-profit autonomous society. It was a joint initiative of Government of India and the national industry represented by FICCI, CIA and SOCHM. The chairman of QCI is appointed by Prime Minister of India on the recommendation of industry. Currently, we are working under the leadership of our chairman, Mr. Adil Jainul Bhai, and our Secretary General, Dr. R.P. Singh. The organization structure of QCI is, we have 4 national accreditation body and 1 quality promotion board. First one is NABET, National Accreditation Board for Education and Training. Another one is NABH, National Accreditation Board for Hospital and Healthcare. Third one is NABCB, the National Accreditation Board for Certification Bodies. And last one is NABL, National Accreditation Board for Testing and Calibration Laboratories. Another one is and National Quality Promotion Board, NBQP, for all the promotional activities of QCI. Apart from that, we also have a special project group, that is PPID, Project Planning and Implementation Division, PADD, Project Analysis and Documentation Division, TCB Equist, Training Capacity Building. TCB Equist is the host of today's webinar. Thank you. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Kaushik to introduce us with the faculty and share the brief about the topic of this program. We wish you all a nice and interactive session. Over to Dr. Kaushik.
Thank you, Kokila. I think it's a pleasure for us on behalf of Shankara Eye Foundation India to partner with QCI on this very important topic of healthcare communication. And although communication is very critical, I think today it is even more important because we are in an era of COVID, and it has almost changed the way we live. And more importantly, it is also going to impact the way we practice medicine and healthcare. So communication becomes that much more important in terms of how we make it effective. On this discussion today, as mentioned by Kokila, I have with me Gokul, who's done his master's in psychology. He's had an extensive experience in the healthcare field, both in India and the UK. He's been associated with us as a clinical psychologist, and we've been using a lot of psychological principles in our communication at Shankara. Again, Shankara Eye Hospital, we are a network of eye hospitals across India. We are among India's largest community eye care providers, and we've also walked the path of quality and accreditation with every one of our hospitals being affiliated with the National Accreditation Board for Hospitals. So for us, quality and accreditation is something that we found extremely useful, and we found a lot of the QCI programs extremely useful. Our hope is that at the end of today, you will walk away with some tools that each one of you can implement irrespective of the size of the healthcare organization or the specialty that you're practicing in to more effectively communicate to every stakeholder of yours. So getting on to our presentation, as I mentioned, today we are forced with a lot of uncertainty. The uncertainty is compounded by the vulnerability that every one of us faces, irrespective of whether we are a patient or a doctor. I think today healthcare professionals feel more threatened with this disease than patients do. And of course, we have to fight with the various social media platforms that act as universities with anecdotes that are floating in. So in this kind of a scenario, communication becomes even more important. And all of us as healthcare leaders are in a spotlight. What do I mean by that is COVID has put the light on healthcare. We've had our Honorable Prime Minister encourage the population to step out in support for us. We've also had people look up to us for correct information. So while COVID is a threat, it also is an opportunity where people are looking at every healthcare leader in terms of how are we delivering, how effective are we, and this effectiveness is dependent on how well we are able to communicate with everybody else. Because this spotlight is temporary, this spotlight is very quickly going to move away. While the spotlight is on us, how do we utilize this to showcase to the world how good we are as leaders and how effective the institutions we are associated with are good in terms of delivering healthcare. So this becomes very, very critical. The global pandemic is again very, very unique. I've again taken some points out of a paper that was published from the Harvard School of Public Health, in that this is the first pandemic that is happening in the era of social media. So this is the first difference that we are facing today compared to the earlier pandemics that we've had. Again, we are saturated with information from multiple media channels which are accurate, but because of the sheer volume of information that is coming to us, we tend to get very overwhelmed. Second, there is a possibility of disinformation and misinformation. What is the difference? Misinformation happens from our knowledge gaps. In that, we have half knowledge. So whatever we hear, we assume is correct, and we then propagate that. So this could be the multiple forwards that you receive, where without applying your mind, without scientific knowledge, you're trying to push it forward. Disinformation is much more dangerous. Here you have certain groups that sow distrust towards information. This we've seen happening even against the call for social distancing. We've seen it happening with the requirement of wearing masks. We've seen it happen with certain social segments of society being targeted. So again, we have to be very, very careful when we are communicating as influential leaders, that one, we are not misinforming people, that our knowledge is complete. And two, if there is any disinformation that we come across, that we call it out. Again, when we look at COVID specifically, there are multiple parameters that we have to see. There are multiple stakeholders when we talk of healthcare specifically. We have our own colleagues who are our professional colleagues, either the nursing staff or fellow doctors. We have the patients whom we are dealing with in terms of a hospital environment. And of course, we have our board who are our governors. We may have investors if we are an equity funded. So these are three large segments. What is common to all of them? The most common thing is, irrespective of who you are at first a human being. So emotions come into play. There is a huge amount of fear. There's a huge amount of anxiety that is cropping in. This fear and anxiety is not only about how we are going to cope with the condition, but also about how we are going to cope with it as a family. So this becomes very, very important. The second aspect that comes in is in terms of the technical information. So we've all had to rewrite our SOPs, we've all had to rewrite our protocols and share it with them. And this has to be done in a very timely fashion, because the epidemic is going to affect us today. We are continuing to see emergency cases across our hospitals. So how are your SOPs being redone? Because what we are all conscious of is delivering quality care, irrespective of COVID being there or a crisis being there. How can we continue to deliver quality is most critical. All these three dimensions of emotion, quality, and the technical knowledge, the only way we can sort it out is with communication. So, which is where today's webinar becomes even more relevant, saying that how effective are we able to deliver communication. So I will now hand it over to Gokul and probably take over towards the fag end of this presentation. And please continue to type your questions in. As Kokila mentioned, please mention your organization and type it onto your YouTube link, and we will try and answer those questions at the end of our talk. Before we switch, I think one organization that has been at the forefront of communication has been Amul. I've again borrowed a clipping from them. I take this opportunity to thank every healthcare professional who's on this webinar session for your own contribution to the entire COVID outbreak, because I think each one of us has played a very important role to be able to take forward and fight this entire COVID situation. So a big shukriya, a big thank you to every one of you. So over to you, Gokul.
Just to start off with, there are a couple of statements that you can see on your screen, and one among them is, false. So if you could just quickly read through and identify which statement among that is false, then we could start off with the presentation. Yeah, the first statement talks about good communication helps improve patient perception about healthcare facility. The second one is about 80% of serious medical errors are due to communication failure. Communication with doctor is the only deciding factor for patient satisfaction. And the next one is effective communication contributes to job satisfaction. So if you look at these four statements, the statement that's probably false is the communication with doctor is the only deciding factor, because on an average, a patient comes across to about say 16 to 15 different professionals when he enters and leaves the hospital. So, and any one of them, if the communication is improper or not effective, it can lead to dissatisfaction. So it is very unfair to hold only the doctor responsible for communication. It perhaps is everyone's role to play as part of healthcare professional that you communicate effectively. Right. So with that, if you look at what effective communication constitutes of, and in theory, it's all about the context. So in the current times, if you look at the context, is that we are having a pandemic and it is sort of a crisis. So how do you set your communication to the context, as Dr. Kaushik was mentioning before? And next is about your content and how complete or accurate is your content, because as you know, there could be a lot of misinterpretations or wrong information going around. Next is how do you make a connect to people whom you're communicating, because this is something that becomes very important, because how do people trust your communication? How do people trust on you that, oh, yes, what this person is delivering or what this organization is delivering is important, right? And overall, some amount of intelligence in terms of how you communicate is very essential. And perhaps that's what this webinar will focus on. So if you look at these two pictures, it's pretty relevant in terms of what communication mishaps happen. Often what we assume is that I know, so the other person should also know about it, and we just expect things out there that people would understand. But it's not always true. It's sometimes what you understand is perhaps not what the other person understands, or what you have said is what the other person understood. So somewhere, appropriate communication does play a role, because it can lead to serious medical errors, it can lead to patient dissatisfaction, and it can lead to crisis or conflict within an organization. So if you look at what common factors, which constitute communication failures, they're essentially, there are quite an extensive list of it, but I'm going to read through, the most important ones that are relevant to these times. The first and foremost is the human factors. So we must, really take into account that this is a stressful time, and everybody is experiencing fear and anxiety, as said before. And when you are operating on fear and survival and all these modes, you're more prone to communication errors. So always factoring in this human factor about stress and anxiety would definitely, pave way through, good communication. Obviously, then there are certain things about hierarchy within an organization where the boss says it and the people below him have to just follow. And it is not a two-way communication. And the moment this doesn't happen, obviously there would be communication failures that would be established. So if you look at overall communication, the goal of a communication is to come to a shared understanding. And if that shared understanding is not reached, obviously the communication failures could clear up. It could also be due to differences in training. What doctors are trained and the nurses are trained is not what the others are trained. And within the professional, the training is pretty different. So these differences in training could also influence how one communicates to others. And somewhere, it has to be leveled up to an extent where there's a shared understanding. Another important bit is organizational culture. As an organization, do you encourage open communication? As an organization, do you promote open communication? And if you don't, then probably the communication failures are more prone to happen. So if you look at this, it's all about perspective. It's all about what I say and what you listen, and what you listen is what I say. And somewhere, as I said before, the common goal is to come to a shared understanding. It's not always about the standpoint that I stand is what is right, and what standpoint you stand is wrong. And that sort of an attitude would not work forward. So often what we see is just the tip of an iceberg. What we don't associate is what is much beneath it. So what we see is probably a reaction of a person to a situation. What we don't associate it to, why is the person thinking that way? Why is the person communicating that way? And take into all the important factors that contribute to that communication. So it is very essential that you just don't look at the action, you also look a little way beyond and look at the underlying factors. So if you look at a healthcare toolkit, there are lot of tools that you could use. So for the sake of this presentation, what we've done is we've not gone into the breadth of the toolkits, but what we've done is we've picked a few and we're going to focus more in depth of those tools and how those can be applied in this stuff. So first, an important one is, how do you make a start? Because how you make a start is how you capture your audience. Say for today's example, to give you, there was a small story shared. Then we also had a little activity about finding, what was a false statement among those statements, which sort of got the audience engaged. See, unless your audiences are engaged, and especially in these current times where most of our communication is happening through audiovisual systems. So, and if you don't get them engaged even on these platforms, obviously that builds up the barrier and you wouldn't be able to move forward in terms of communicating appropriately. So it's very essential how you make a start. So another tool that is the most essential during these times is empathy. What empathy is perhaps, if I just gave you an example, that if you saw an old man lying on a street, and you just pass by and you feel sorry for him, that's like, okay, you were passing by through him and you saw him and you just say, oh, I feel very sorry for him. It's just, you're taking pity on the person. Then, the next step to that would be probably you go to a shop and probably buy what you think the person needs and give that person. That's probably where you're coming from, a sympathy point of view, where you think this is what the old man needs and that's what you're taking it. But empathy is not sympathy or pity. It's a little beyond that. You literally put yourself in the other person's perspective and see what exactly they need, rather than thinking that what you think is what they need. That's where the difference comes. So it's, as I said, it's taking perspective and walking in the shoes of others. So previously they used to say, put yourself in the other person's shoe, but now they've expanded that statement to saying that it's not just enough to put yourself in somebody else's shoe, it's also essential that you walk a mile in it and see what exactly it feels like, because that's where your actions and your words would really be derivative of. So if you really looked at from other person's perspective, that's where that it would play an important role. So just look at this picture. What do you see? Do you see a duck or do you see a rabbit? Again, it comes down to perspective taking, isn't it? So obviously, People could see duck, rabbit, or both, but at the end of the day, it's the perspective that the person holds. So first step to empathy is that you need to take somebody else's perspective. And how do you take it? And the most important tool in that is asking open-ended questions. So when you ask an open-ended question, it is firstly you're expressing an intent and an interest that you're interested in knowing about the other person's perspective. And it also gives the other person more control into what statements or what reply he is going to give, rather than close-ended questions. Just look at this example. If I just ask you how stressed you've been lately, have you been stressed? Have you been stressed lately? Your answer would probably lie maybe yes or no, depending on how you relate to me. You probably would lie to me, or you would be honest about it. But if I ask an open-ended question, say, can you share what is bothering you? Probably the depth of information or the detail of information that you would get from the person's point of view would be much in detail. So an important tool in getting somebody's perspective, first and foremost, is asking open-ended questions. The next one is listening. Just not listening, something called active listening, which is a very essential component of practicing empathy or taking perspective of somebody. So how is it done? So the first and foremost is there should be an intent to listen. You can't just be forced to listening, especially active listening. There has to be a definite intent that you really care and you really are concerned for somebody, and you're present there. And when you're present there, there is a certain amount of preparation that you need to look at. First and foremost is you're not just physically present, but also mentally present. So just for an example, you have a lot of things running in your mind about completing certain orders or completing certain files, and somebody walks into your door and then they're expressing certain concern, and then you still are engaged in those thoughts. And that's not fair for the person who's sharing, because you're not completely listening. So first and foremost preparation is that you're mentally and physically present there for the person. The next one is we often jump into answering people. We often switch into giving replies to people or cut people through. But that wouldn't pave way through an entire communication. So one of the essential starts is that you be silent, let the person speak. And obviously, as I said before, ask more of open-ended questions. And the most important thing is do not judge. If a person is saying whatever, do not judge him at this stage. Next is that you need to encourage the person to speak. So how would you do is that you would ask them, okay, you mentioned this aspect. Can you tell me a little more about what you mean by that? At this stage, you do not agree or disagree. You use very neutral words, and you could have a varying voice tones. Next step, which is about paraphrasing, which is the most crucial step of active listening. That is, you would apply exactly what you understood of what the person said. So it would be in action. It would look like that. Okay, so this is what I understand from what you just shared. And what you would do is you would repeat exactly what the person said, but in your own words. What happens is that when you practice paraphrasing, obviously the person feels that you have understood, and you're definitely listening to them, right? Say example, if you were speaking to somebody and you ask a certain question to them, and the person completely replies, which is completely irrelevant. And then you probably know the person was not really listening to you. Similarly, when you paraphrase, it also gives the person a perspective saying that, okay, you know what, I've shared so much details and this person has definitely listened to me. Next is clarifying. So as I said, that duck and rabbit episode, where you saw, what you understood is not probably what the person wanted to convey. So somewhere you need to clarify, you get more information on what it is and start seeing what the point of view of a speaker is. So that's where the clarification also becomes a very important step in active listening. So in this case, what you do is, in action, you would ask more questions and also restate any wrong interpretation. You would say, see, I've understood this. Am I right in understanding this? So then what happens is, if you have not understood it right, the speaker, the person who's speaking to you gets an opportunity to correct, and you again arrive at a shared understanding. The last part, which is the most crucial and the essential part, which we often miss out on, is about reflecting on their feelings and validating their feelings. So in these times where the emotions are high and up and all of us would experience to some extent some anxiety, stress, fear, multitude of emotions. So it's not that you could always address the emotions, but somewhere if you listen and validate it, what you just expressed, I can understand. This is exactly what it must be for you. So in action, it is just exactly looking at basic feelings that the person must be feeling, either they have expressed or you noticed in their face, and you just state it back and say that, yeah, what you just are experiencing makes sense. If I were in your place, I would also probably would be feeling same. So this again becomes a very crucial step in your active listening. And towards the end, because when you're communicating, there will be a lot of it that you would have spoken about during this exchange. It is very essential that you summarize key points that you spoke. So this again, as I said, is another tool that you would use to get somebody's perspective and be empathic. The next one within this is 55% of conversation happens non-verbally. It's not just about what you say, it's about how your body language speaks for yourself. So I've just listed out a few essential body language through that you communicate. First and foremost is the eye contact. It is so extensively researched and so extensively put out there that eye contact is the most essential tool when you're communicating non-verbally. Right. Next is about how much distance do you maintain from the person. Ideally, it's about arm's distance is what is considered as a safe space for where you're not encroaching on their personal space, or neither are they encroaching in your personal space, and you feel comfortable talking to the person. The next is the tone of voice that you use. It again communicates a lot. In fact, it constitutes 38% of the 55% that I stated before of the communication that you do non-verbally. So that becomes an essential part of your communication. Next is, when you are speaking to somebody and you're listening to them, you naturally tend to nod. And that's why I put nodding, because often when it's a good indicator, if you're not listening to the person, you probably are not nodding. And it's a good indicator when you're delivering a lecture or something, you would see people who are actually listening to you actually nod. Okay. Next important one is posture. The posture that you maintain either encourages the person to continue talking to you or shut down. So example, if you keep close posture like this, although you might be comfortable doing this because that's what you are used to, and you're not intentionally, asking the person to stop talking. But there have been enough research to show that when you keep an open posture, the verbal output of a person, which when it was measured, was much lesser when you had an open posture. Again, another person is another aspect is when you're really interested in what the other person is saying, and when you're really listening, you naturally lean forward towards the other person. So keeping that, again, that's a good indicator whether you're really listening or the other person is listening to you. So that's one. The next one is your facial expression. I think face is definitely an index of ourselves, and it definitely is an index to our communication. So ideally, it should be in tune with the emotions that are being expressed. What I mean by that is, if a person is being really sad and is expressing certain concerns, and your facial expressions don't, relate to it, you probably are smiling because you're thinking of something. Obviously, then there's a barrier of communication that you've established. So obviously, what's crucial here is sort of being in tune. If you can't really be sad, that's perfectly fine, but having some neutral expression, especially in difficult circumstances where people are expressing. Next is touch. Wherever appropriate, touch does play a big role, and your hand gestures. So if you, sometimes we can communicate aggressiveness through our hand gestures. So it's again a very essential thing that you should be mindful of when you're communicating. Right. So these are traditionally what body language talks about, and this is something we've been using it in our day-to-day communication. But given circumstances, there are a lot of barriers to a lot of these. Say now you're going to wear PPE or goggles, or you're going to wear mask. So how do you now sort of do all of these? There are certain things which still get missed out. Probably they won't be able to see your face completely. They won't be able to read your facial expressions. So or it could be that there's a lot of online communication that's happening. So there's definitely no distance, they can't read your body language. So these become essentially barriers in current times. So how do you overcome it? Couple of things, as I said before, tone of your voice still plays a big important role. So just being mindful of how you speak and the tone of voice that you use would still communicate that you care and you are empathetic towards the other person. Or other simple things would be that in your PPE, if you could just stick your name on your PPE using a sticker or something, at least they know that there's a person behind those masks and all these safeguarding things that you're wearing. So, or you could have a picture of yourself, on your desk, where at least, although you're covered in mask and protective gear, at least a person could see a picture and say, okay, this is the person I'm actually talking to, not to some random stranger on basically. So get creative. Maybe you could use different infrastructure to kind of address these, communication through body language, which are now going to be barriers to you. Basically, there are three principles in communication. One is that you need to deal with the emotion, which is the crucial thing, especially in healthcare, that if you don't deal with the emotion, there is no point in what information you give, and probably it won't even be received well. Okay. Second is, whatever information you deliver, it should be in small packets. And it should not be extensive medical jargon or whatever it is. Try keeping it as minimal as possible and as small as possible, as precise as possible, basically. And whatever you do, patient value should be at heart of all your treatment plans. So these were essentially the three principles of communication in healthcare that we've been used to so far. Maybe just putting that in practice, I'll just show you, how do you deliver a bad news to a person. What they've done is, there are many protocols available online, if you look, and these are well evidence-based protocols that you could use in your communication when you're delivering bad news. I've just picked one among them, which is called the BRAKES protocol. So what do you do in this? So first and foremost, you do a background assessment, and background assessment is at 2-3 levels. First level is that you are well prepared to deliver these news. So you've covered all your bases. You've looked through all the evidences. You've looked everything. All the communication that needs to be said. You're well researched and you're prepared. So if you're at any point you feel you're not prepared for it, please don't go ahead with that appointment. Probably the best is to take some time and prepare best with all the facts and figures, because in today's generation, everything is available online, and I'm very certain that your clients or your patients would have already Googled other symptoms and the treatment options, and they would come invariably with a number of questions. So for you to be prepared for all these questions, you should be thorough in your background information, right? The second background information is about the patient, so which talks mainly about their cultural background, what you already know, how they cope, what is their support system, who is there in the family, what is their financial state. Multiple aspects of the patient are very essential. Okay, and another very important one is the cultural sensitivity. Different diagnoses or different bad news are received differently in different cultures. So you should be really sensitive to the cultural needs of a person, educational background of a person. If I'm going to say this, is this person going to understand? How do I reframe my sentences? So all this background information is essential, and also where you do it. The physical setup of it is also very important. Say if you're doing it in a noisy room where people are often walking in and walking out, probably that's not the best place to do it. So where you do it is again very essential. And also, as I said before, it's just not about being present physically, complete presence. So maybe switching off your phones and completely avoiding all possible distractions would be a good start. Next important one is rapport building. See, when you follow certain protocols in communicating bad news, it's not just helpful just for the patient, it's also helpful for you as a practitioner, because it helps you deal with the emotions that the patient would bring in and how you react and how your own personal emotions would pump in at that point. So it's essential that you build a good rapport with the person. And how do you do it is starting off with asking about the current status, like, of the illness. How are you feeling today, or what is going on? So just start off there. And next is that you explore. So at this stage, all you need to do is explore what is the current understanding of the condition that they have. Because it's very essential, because you know exactly if there are any disbeliefs, if there are any misinterpretation, misinformation at all at this stage, which then you can tackle when you announce the information to the person. So when you announce, again, keep it short. Don't use too much medical jargon. As a rule of thumb, if anything said, if more than 3 things said, that the person doesn't receive it enough. So keep it to as minimal as possible, but do communicate what is essential. So once you announce the bad news, obviously how a person reacts to it would be different. There would be an array of emotional responses to it. Some people would take it, some people would deflect, some people would completely switch off from listening to you, some people would start crying, it would have an emotional outburst, some people could even burst out laughing. There could be an array of emotional responses. But what is essential at this stage is that you allow it to happen. Often what we do is, I've said it now, let it be. Maybe the person has not completely understood, has not completely, listened to the following instructions, or whatever it is. So it's very essential at this stage that you allow the emotional response to finish, and then again establish that what is it that they've understood so far. And finally, you summarize. At this stage, you discuss exactly what's been told and offer support wherever essential, whatever essential treatment options. Often what we do is, when the person cries out or, is highly emotional, we tend to give false hope, or we tend to give unrealistic treatment options, which might, backfire at you at a later point. So avoid doing those things, summarize, which is very objective, and give the patient that information. And also, you need to be mindful that once you've passed on this, information, how a person reacts to it after he, steps out of your room is also somewhere your responsibility. So making sure that they might have not driving back, or there's somebody, with them to take them back home. Essential support is in place. So this is like how an empathy in practice, especially when you're breaking a bad news to a person. So as I said, now in this crisis time, probably the first two principles remain the same, that you need to deal with the emotion, and the information still needs to be delivered in small packets. What probably has changed is it's probably moved from patient-centered to the society, or the standards of care that the government or your organization is set up to deliver. So and which would be part of your treatment plans. So simple thing, say if you're communicating, this is again a mnemonic or a protocol that you could look at, where you could explain where the information is very precise, and all essential questions that.
So if I may just interject in. So what happens is, Gokul is a trained psychologist, so he knows clearly how to communicate. For most of us as healthcare professionals or as doctors, we are used to speaking in very telegraphic kind of sentences. And today, with a lot of advisory coming with COVID also, we are advised not to talk too much to the patient face to face. So it is always very useful for you to have what is called as a message plan. So what do you want to say? Towards that, this kind of a talking map will help you. The first and foremost thing is to kind of guide the patient, telling him, saying, what is it that we are going to do? So you start off saying, here is what we are planning to do for you. So that way the patient knows that you're directly talking to him. The second thing that to do is to give a headline. So it's like your news. So once you give a title, then the patient knows what is going to follow. So if you can probably start off saying, I'm going to share with you what is going to happen to you when you're being shifted to the ICU, or I'm going to tell you what needs to be done when you're in home quarantine, or I'm going to tell you when you're going to get the surgery done, what needs to be done. The next part of it is to kind of explain what the care is and affirm, saying that this is what I'm going to do. So you're saying that we are going to be doing this and we hope that you will recover. We are going to be doing this and we hope that you're okay with it. Not everything that you tell to the patient is necessarily going to be nice to him. So you need to kind of respond to the emotional part of it. So which is what Gokul had added, saying that, are you being empathetic? Have you listened to the patient and recognize his facial mannerisms? So you could probably go back and tell him saying, I know how unfair this sounds, but sorry, this is what it is. So if you look at any of these quarantine instructions that are being given today, we're asking somebody to isolate themselves. So you can kind of respond saying, I understand how this is going to be extremely difficult. And then you go on to emphasize saying that the rules are not different, saying that this is what we've done to every patient who's been tested positive. This is what we've done to every patient we've suspected. So this kind of a talking map is also very useful for you to have in mind when you're going to be talking to employees. Now that our hospitals are opening up for more and more patients, there is a good chance that, God forbid, some of our colleagues may end up being COVID positive. So having a clear talking map allows you to kind of be very clear and be very consistent in what you're going to communicate to the patients. So that kind of helps you in delving through this entire thing. Again, I think we'll come to the second part of our talk where we're going to share one other thing. So quite often, we as doctors tend to be a little aggressive. We get irritated very quickly. So we're going to play 2 audio clips. And the first, it's the same situation. So this is a boss and an employee kind of a situation where the employee has missed his deadline to submit an important file.
I've given you several chances to redeem yourself, and as your superior, I've been patient enough to let you attend college while working. How many managers allow that?
I've been doing my best. I'll work harder.
That won't cut it for me. You better get your act together. And maybe if you stop watching whatever nonsense it is that you watch on your phone all day, you'd be able to function better.
I'm really so sorry.
You better be. Those files better be on my table by tomorrow morning.
But ma'am, you said the deadline wasn't until the day after.
Do what you're told to do.
So this is a typical situation of I am your boss, I am right, you're wrong, I am big, you're small kind of a thing. So this is a very, very aggressive kind of a posture. Now let's look at another possible scenario and see what our learnings can be from that.
I understand that you've been going through a lot lately and you must be juggling with college and work, but please understand that work is equally important.
I've been doing it my best. I don't know anyone who has worked as hard as I have.
I understand that, and you're an important asset to the company, but you haven't been meeting the deadlines, and that's costing us a lot of clients.
But I really do stay up late, and I'm doing the best that I can.
I understand that, but it would be unfair for everyone else if we excuse you, and I hope that you understand what we have at stake here.
So if you looked at the second video, it is the boss was being a lot more assertive. So they were being very clear. They were not really giving up on the posture or feeling sad for him and saying, oh, it is okay, this time I excuse you. But they were kind of sticking to the point of saying that the deadline was missed. But it was not a personal attack on him. So they were telling them about how they were feeling. More importantly, they were telling them how the particular behavior or the action affects work, possibly in our kind of a situation, patient care, as well as the organization. And quite often when you're being assertive, you could prefer to tell them what you want them to do. So you're giving them a possible solution that they may not have thought about, and that can kind of take on to that.
So often when you are aggressive and you're working with people, it could lead to conflicts. And it's just not that, but there are other things that also could, be a source of conflicts. Just for example, personal differences, like maybe take cultural differences. In South, when we are not good at Hindi, we just are used to saying tum, tum, tum. and say we come to probably go to Lucknow or a place like that, where if you say tum, it's quite offensive, isn't it? And that could lead to a conflict. The second one is, where the information is deficient. Say, example, you've developed your SOPs, and what you would expect is that everybody reads through it and follows it through. But essentially, not everyone is read it. So when this, not everybody is on the same page and has a shared understanding, that could lead to conflicts. Next is role incompatibility. There are two aspects to it. One is that probably you're not trained to do the job that trained enough or trained well to do the job that you're doing, or a completely misfit person, like maybe their personality type or their attitude, are handling a portfolio which they're not supposed to be, or not efficient enough to handle. So that could lead to conflicts. Next is environmental stress, which again is about how you say. Example could be that you've had a fight at home, or there are certain things that you need to deal with at home, and you bring that to work. And when you do that, obviously from the start of the day you're irritated, and any small thing could just make it worse for you, and then you end up having a conflict with them. And this is just not a conflict within employees, among employees. It could also be a conflict with the patient or or an attender that was walked through. So what strategies that you could employ to effectively deal with the conflicts? As I said, conflicts are not completely avoidable. They would come in place. It's just how effectively you manage with them is what is essential. So depending on how assertive and how cooperative you are, your strategies would matter. So I'll just give you a simple example. Now that there are protocols for safety and health and safety that are put in place, not everybody would be okay with it, but they are there for a reason and they need to be followed. So at that point, all you would want is that you would win. I mean, like, that needs to be done. So not everybody's point of view is respected. It just needs to be followed through, right? And if somebody is not following or is not doing, then it's probably better to avoid them or not get them to work. But while you're developing your protocols, if you included every aspect, or if you included a person from all the aspects of your work, maybe the nurses or the doctors, all the personnel, what would happen is the protocol you would develop would be developed with different perspectives, sticking to and people are more out to follow. Right? And maybe there are certain things that you need to accommodate. Say, example, staff who are at high risk for infection, and such people may be allowed not to work. That could be an avoiding aspect. But somewhere, dealing with the entire scenario or situation, there is a certain amount of compromise that you would have to make, right? So what the evidence suggests is that at any given point, especially in healthcare, you should be, as a leader, aware of which strategies to use and be comfortable in using all strategies. Say, example, you might not be a very assertive person, and if you're not an assertive person, for you to execute some certain things would not be easy, and that could lead to conflict. But that's not how it is. You should be able to be assertive, you should be able to cooperate, and you should be able to use all these strategies at any given point, wherever essential. So just to put this in perspective, say you're handling a patient or an attender who's angry. So I've just listed out a few strategies that you could be using. First and foremost thing that you need to remember is that the anger that the patient or the attender is experiencing is not directed at you. It's not about you. It's definitely that they are experiencing certain thing, and there's an underlying aspect to it. Just I've written two aspects. That is, sometimes when people are in pain and fear, it can cause increased stress, and that stress can lead to anxiety and frustration. How you react to pain and fear is completely different to what the other person reacts, and we all have our ways to react. And some people do resort to frustration. So how do you handle that? First and important aspect is look for signs. The sooner you diffuse it, the better it is. The signs could be, they're clenching their face, they're quite fidgety, their facial expressions have changed, or suddenly, person who's talking suddenly stops talking you, or you notice something unusual in their posture, whatever it is. So always keep on a lookout for signs. The sooner you look, the sooner you diffuse, the better it is. The next aspect is show empathy. Always trying to understand what is the underlying reason, rather than saying, oh, this person got angry, and you start responding from an aggressive standpoint, right? Next is don't get manipulated by the patient's anger. At any point, be calm and professional. Don't get manipulated by the patient's anger and react again angry or avoiding whatever it is. Be professional at all times. Maintain eye contact and also be mindful of your body language. As I said before, your body language speaks a lot. If you stand in defensive positions or aggressive positions, it would just aggravate the situation. Another important thing to note is if a person is getting, is very angry and is just speaking a lot, please do not respond till this verbal bombardment is over. What we tend to do is we cut off people, or we try stopping people, and then they get more aggressive. When somebody is, bombarding you, with verbal, even if they're abuses, do not respond at that point. Just wait till that is over and then initiate the conversation. At any point, even if a patient intimidates you, do not justify the situation or defend your actions. Because if you start, justifying the situation or your actions, you're just going to make it worse for yourself. So instead, use active listening, as I said before. What you could do is, you would know certain things about the patient or what the patient has already told you. What you could do is just keep paraphrasing them to them, where again, it essentially communicates that you've listened to them and you've understood them. Okay? Next is, if the situation is genuine and there have been some errors committed or some mistakes that have happened, do express regret. I'm sorry that you're angry about the situation that's happened, and maybe agree to some point. If they might have a valid point, maybe agree. Yes, it makes sense that you waited for so long. That's why you're angry about it, right? And now that they're angry, probably at this place they've calmed down a little bit. Ask them for solutions. So often, what we tend to do is we tend to give solution. You could do that. You could do this. You could do that. Again, that would just make an angry person. Just imagine yourself when you're angry. Would you like being told what needs to be done? And it definitely would make things worse for you. So you need to ask the person what the possible solutions are. And maybe you could agree, disagree, negotiate. As I said, use these conflict resolution strategy, whichever is appropriate, and probably come to an agreement. But at any point, if a patient threatens or you physically feel, fear for your safety, do not hesitate to call for help, because this is a stage where it is beyond control and you can't handle it. So do call for help when that is required.
So we come to kind of the last part of our presentation, where we're going to talk about more hard skills. So negotiation is something that is key for us, either as a healthcare provider or as a healthcare leader. So we've heard about conflict, we've heard certain strategies on how to handle conflict. But the best way to handle the conflict is where you negotiate, where people who have two different interests or completely different outlook attempt to reach an agreement. So that is what we would refer to as a win-win kind of a situation. So when you're negotiating, so this could be when you're negotiating with a vendor, when you're negotiating with a patient, you're negotiating with an attender, you need to understand the difference between the interest and the position. So position, to explain what it is, position is what that person wants. Interest is why does he want it. Just to use an example, imagine you're in the emergency, a patient with a myocardial infarction has walked in, you've done an echo, you've done all the tests, you know that the person needs an angioplasty, you've explained to him, he has understood completely that he needs it done, financially he is capable of getting it done, there are no such problems. But at the end of all this, the patient says, doctor, I agree to all of this, but I want to go. Now, there are two things you can do. One, you can get extremely irritated, saying, what a waste of my time. He's such an idiot. Doesn't he realize it is life-threatening? And you let him go. Or you step back and think, being a little empathetic, saying, why is he unwilling to do this? So if you had asked him, saying, sir, you seem to have understood everything, but why are you still so adamant? Why are you still insisting on going home? In today's era, he may probably tell you saying, you know what, I have a single daughter at home. She has a daughter, I have a granddaughter, and me and my wife take care of her every day. My daughter has gone for a conference. So until she comes back, I can't do anything. So at this stage, you could probably ask him to connect to his daughter. You could explain the position to her, and she could come back, and very quickly this can be done. So here, once you've understood the why he is not agreeing, this becomes very easy for you to negotiate. The second thing is, it is not only important what you say, but also important how you say. So today we've had an extended summer vacation at home, and this happened in my house. So my daughter and niece were discussing about how they wanted to watch a particular series on TV. And my niece was complaining, saying that, oh, my mother doesn't let me watch at all. So I keep telling her, can I watch TV while I'm studying? And she just refuses. And then my daughter told her, hey, you should not have said that. You know what you should have asked? I asked Appa, and he let me. So I asked Appa, saying, is it okay to study when I'm watching TV? My father was so thrilled that I'm going to study even when I'm watching TV. He said, okay. So today, see, I have a book open and I'm watching TV. So this becomes very important in that what you say is as important as how you say it. So remember that how you frame the statement becomes very critical. The last bit is, when you're framing the statement, you need to realize saying that people are very comfortable in a status quo situation. So when you're asking for difficult tests, so this, we saw it very commonly with HIV testing and certain other tests that needed to be done. When you ask a person to opt out, they are less likely because psychologically they like to go with the flow. So always having an opt out is better for you when you want to get a difficult test done. Second, when you're communicating, when you're counseling a person to get a particular test or a procedure done, telling them what they're going to lose is much better than telling them what they're going to benefit. For example, telling a person, get this surgery done so that your vision gets retained. Well, I may or may not find it important, but if I were to tell him saying, look, if you don't get this procedure done, whatever vision you have, there is a risk of you losing it going forward. The person is much more likely to get it done. So people are always afraid of losing things. Also remember that the person you're negotiating with may not be the only decision maker. It could be his wife, it could be his daughter. So keep an eye on all parties that are involved. Even when you're negotiating, say, with a vendor, be aware that he may not be the person who may be finally taking the decision. It may be his boss. So it may be important for you to kind of engage with them because all of them can influence the outcome. So in a patient, it could be the son or a daughter. I'm a children's eye specialist. I've always realized that whenever children come to me, the mother is the most critical person. So unless she is on board, whatever I say will never get implemented. In a boardroom kind of a situation, when you are an employee and presenting to the board, you need to remember who all are the people who can influence. It is not just the chairman. It could be his executive assistant, it could be a few other board members who could actually be your champions and speak on your behalf. So be aware about the negotiation space that you're in. Finally, COVID has made us write a lot more. So it is not just about writing prescriptions, but a lot of written communication that is going on. Whenever you're writing, make sure that it is unambiguous. Don't go in long-winded statements, which people may lose the essence of the meaning. It has to be very, very clear. It has to be very short, and it has to be very precise. Why is this important? Earlier, you could do a town hall where you call everybody for a meeting. You tell them what has to be done. Subsequently, in the corridor or over coffee, you could again meet people, explain to them certain things that they may not be very clear about. But today you don't have that option. It is a single opportunity to get your information across. And also, since it is a written record, it is also a permanent record. So you need to be very careful about it. The second situation that has become a part of our life is social media. So we cannot walk away from it. We need to engage with all our patients. We need to let them remember that we are still around. So you cannot say that I will not be on social media. But while you're on social media, make sure that you're polite and respectful. First and foremost, think before you put any post. The second is be honest and trustworthy, because whatever you post, although it may be from your personal account, there is a good chance that your patient, your peers, your colleagues, your bosses, all of them may read about it. So be very careful in what you're putting onto it. Maintain confidentiality. It's like a healthcare record. So you cannot name a person, be it your colleague or a patient, unless you've taken their permission to do so. So that becomes very, very important. And as in any other communication, boundaries are very, very critical, especially when you're communicating to your colleagues, when you're naming them, when you're commenting on their posts, when you're commenting on their photographs about their family. Be very careful. If somewhere you think it is inappropriate, then maybe you should not go ahead and post it. So what we have attempted to do over the last 40 odd minutes is walk you through certain tools. The last bit, again, which is very relevant to us today is phone calls, because teleophthalmology or teleconsultations have become the key. So communication again is very critical. Quite often, if you do a survey of nursing staff, again, this is from published data, doctors and healthcare staff are thought to be very rushed because we feel that our time is very important. We are also often very rude. We don't mean to be, but we are very to the point. Because for us, it is very clear. This is your problem. This is your diagnosis. This is what has to be done. And often, because of language, because of our accent, because of the speed with which we speak, it can be very hard to understand. And once we start talking, we like our voice so much that we are unwilling to listen. So communication over telephone becomes very, very difficult. So in this scenario, with today's COVID, with telephone calls, how do you communicate? Again, this is largely for nursing staff or even for patients who are looking to communicate to the doctors. Please be prepared. Make sure that you have all the information that you need at your fingertip. So a good way to do this is to look at the situation, understand why you are making that phone call, have all your background information. What are all the parameters that you think is most important for the doctor to know? It could be your past history, it could be other medications that you're taking, it could be investigation. Share what your assessment is. If you're a patient, this could be how much of pain you're in, what you are expecting. If you're a nursing staff, what is it that you're recommending in terms of treatment? The last bit would be your recommendation, saying, sir or madam or Dr. So-and-so, I feel that we need to do this. During all of this, make sure that you are assertive. Again, we've showed an example of how not to be aggressive, but to be assertive, where you're calm, you're polite, and you're persistent until what you want to convey has been conveyed across. Don't be very emotional. Again, there are multiple stresses every one of us is going through. So you need to be very, very aware about that. A good way to run this conversation is first and foremost, introduce yourself. Tell the other person who you are. We may not have saved your number, so we have no clue. So introduce yourself. Second, let them know why you are calling. Third, be very clear in what you need. And the last bit, confirm that you've understood it correctly. So again, like he said, once you've done the active listening, paraphrase and repeat saying, sir, just to confirm, I'm going to document this. You are now asking me to change the dosage of this medicine, or you are asking me to call this patient to come into it. Is that clear? So this will allow you to save time. This will allow you to have a very good conversation. And this will also allow you to minimize errors. So we hope that we work you through a journey of various situations and scenarios. We've looked at various situations where you may have a patient who's very aggressive. We've looked at a situation where a person may be very kind of calm or may not be very aware about it. We've looked at how you need to negotiate. We've looked at hierarchy where you may need to be assertive as against being aggressive. We've also looked at a situation where you look at written communication, how you handle conflict, how you handle an angry patient, and how you handle a telephonic conversation. So with these tools, a lot of them will be relevant even beyond the COVID situation. So if there are any specific questions, we would again request you to kind of share those, and then we can kind of look to replying that. I think the first question has come from Dr. Shantanu, Mr. Shantanu, where he shared about the break, that is in terms of expressing bad news. Again, why is this important today? People in ICU, people who handle palliative care are usually used to it. But today, every one of us may need to handle this breaking of bad news, where you may need to tell a patient that he may need to go on quarantine, or tell a fellow colleague that he has to go on quarantine. So Kokil, if you can just go back through the break.
At what point you would use it is also very essential. No, I can, yeah. Can I go? See, what constitutes bad news, that's also very essential for us to look at. See, any information that you're going to pass on to the person, which would alter their current state of living, or, emotions, whatever it is, something which would really change everything for them at that point. So it could be a diagnosis, which, is quite hard for them to receive, or maybe it's a terminal illness, or at this point, maybe it's that they are COVID positive, right? So it's very essential that how you would run through is that, as I said, first and foremost is to have as much background information as possible. And you yourself are much prepared in terms of what information needs to be shared, or if they ask any questions, which they probably would ask you, you're prepared to answer those questions. Next and foremost is that you establish rapport. Don't hurry. Just start. Ask them how they're doing at this point of the time, and then start. Next aspect would be you explore. See, what is the current knowledge? What is that they understand? Because if just say example, if you ask, what do you understand by quarantine, or what do you understand once you are positive? So people would say, okay, and people would isolate. I need to isolate, and people would not talk to me. I would be looked down upon. There could be a lot of beliefs which are not exactly true, or as misunderstood. So that also gives you an opportunity when you announce, you also address those things, because once you address those things, probably how he receives the information and how he deals with information would be much different. Next stage would be the announce stage, where you deliver the piece of information that needs to be told. Get ready for the emotional response that they're going to give you. And when you announce, make sure that you deliver it in small pack, as precise as possible, and as small sentences as possible. Avoid using all these medical jargon and stuff. The kindling part is where, as I said, everybody has a different response to a bad news. Some people would be in complete denial. Some people would, get angry. Some people would get upset. There could be any set of emotions that could happen. So when somebody is experiencing this emotional stage, whatever you're going to say after that, they're not going to listen. So they've just understood one news, and then just cut. There would be an array of emotional response. And while they're having this emotional response, they're not going to listen to you what the strategies or what precaution, whatever it is, want to follow information that you want to give, they're not going to listen to. So what this stage you need to do is allow them to have this emotional response. Don't rush into, going forward. Finally, you summarize, you look at the strategies or the care that you plan for them, or what is the support that is available. Say if it's terminal illness, what are the other alternative supports that they have. Ensure, as I said, that you don't give them any false hope, because sometimes when we feel very uncomfortable dealing with sadness, or we get sad ourselves, what we tend to do is instill false hope. Avoid doing that. Right? And also towards the end of your session, make an appointment. Ensure that the person is safe even once he leaves out of your office. It could mean that they're not driving by themselves, that they are with somebody. Check with, is there anybody at home that who could speak? What I usually ask a question after a difficult session is that, so what plans after this session? Where are you going to go? So it's sort of, then I give them opportunity, you could do this, you could do that. So that means, what that gives them is a choice what they could be engaging in after the session. So I think, again, I've covered this breaks as repeated it. So any more questions? Let's just.
So I think there's a question from Geeta saying that considering the shortage of supply of PPEs, how to deal when staff ask for all PPEs to be provided to them when it's actually not required. So again, I think it kind of is a mix of whatever we've spoken today. So first and foremost is to be empathetic and kind of understand why they want it. So asking them an open-ended question about, okay, what is it that you understand about PPE, and where do you think your risks are, or what puts you at a higher risk, will help you understand certain things, because sometimes we write SOPs sitting in a room, not necessarily involving all personnel. So, for example, housekeeping staff, we would typically say a face mask and a glove is enough. But if he's an housekeeping staff who's posted in the OT and is having to shift patients and talk to them, maybe he needs a face shield over and above that. So we really don't know that. So understanding that will help you to a large extent. Beyond that, I think it is critical to be assertive and not be very aggressive. So again, you need to kind of stick to your gun in terms of telling them what you think about their behavior, not tell them saying, oh, you are always like this, you're always paranoid. We tend to be very judgmental. And you need to kind of explain to them how it affects it, because sometimes you know that PPE is not available in large supply. So you need to tell them saying, you know what, if I give this to you, somebody who really requires it is not going to get it. Do you think that is fair? Instead of this, one, I can give you a PPE that is there, or instead, why don't you take leave and sit at home? So we've done that as a policy, saying that we believe some of our staff would still be uncomfortable coming in. So we've given them that option of going and identify the stresses that they are in and take it forward. You could always use again the strategy framework that we've shared in terms of looking to accommodate them to some extent, but beyond a point, sticking to your gun and telling them, saying that, you know, this is something that is not done. So finally, it comes to negotiation. I think, again, it is important on how you say it. So being very proactive in putting out a policy about who gets what PPE is very critical, because most of our colleagues are today getting information not from you, but from their WhatsApp groups, which may not be correct. So give them information, give them the correct information so that they can take a much better decision. So I hope that answered your question. The other question has come from Dr. Animesh, who's asked, saying, what do you think is a way forward to train student healthcare professionals, including medical nursing, paramedical students, to train them in communication? So our entire healthcare is dependent on giving knowledge. So it's a very one-way kind of a dialogue that goes in most of our classrooms. The new curriculum has looked to address it by bringing in ethics, bringing in healthcare communication into the regular medical curriculum. But I believe a lot more has to be done. So in terms of delivering lectures, is it possible for us to include role plays? Is it possible for us to include debates? Is it possible for us to include presentations where you have the student actually come forward and present? Because that would allow them to actually stand in front and deliver. It also allows the others to practice active listening, because quite often when you have that one student in the first row always putting his hand up, always having a point of view, so you can actually help them in terms of handling it. So that could be a good way for you to get that kind of a habit going. So that may actually help. And communication, like you rightly pointed out, is not just for the doctors or not just for the leaders, but for every healthcare professional. So having periodical sessions where you have this communication behavior happening, where you can maybe record communication as it is happening and play it back to them, can be a great tool, because a lot of people do it at a very unconscious or a subconscious level. They don't mean to be rude, but that's the way they are. A lot of people will just barge into rooms and tell you, saying, hey, this is wrong. Because in them, what you're doing, they're interested in your goodwill or in your good behavior. They're not trying to point a finger at you. So sometimes telling them subsequently, you could have done this differently, allows them to kind of practice that.
Probably at this minute, people don't have the right ingredients to do the right recipe. So all these tools, as we said, there are only few tools we discussed there, but extensively there are different tools. If given and if everybody trained in it, it definitely would lead or pave way to effective communication.
So this is a question from Prashant, saying that how do you handle rural patients who probably are no longer visiting our hospital? So how do you let them know that it is safe? So I think, again, that's where I added that last slide about social media communication, because that becomes a very critical aspect in terms of us being able to communicate to people. So today, possibly many Indians have access to a smartphone where they can access messages. So can you create a short message? It could be a poster. Again, it has to be visual. So you can't send a long text, or you can't share the 100+ page SOP that you've written up, but something that is very concise. It could be a video message that goes out that shows to them what you have done in your hospital. So we've again attempted doing something like that, where we've demonstrated how hand hygiene is being done, how temperature is being recorded, how staff are wearing PPE, how distances is being maintained, how are we reducing crowding. So that can bring back a lot of confidence to the patients. Again, letting them know that everything is not shut and that you handle patients and surgeries are ongoing, emergencies are ongoing is important, because for a person sitting in a village, he thinks if it's locked down, everything is locked. So make sure that people are aware that you still are open to handle emergencies. So social media becomes a great platform to get this message across. So even today, for example, we're using a blend of online technology, and we're using YouTube to get information across India. So you need to use these platforms and not walk away from this.
And when you're communicating through these mediums, it's not always that empathy can be communicated only, when you meet the person or you talk to the person directly. Even in these communication, you could include a line or two saying that we understand, these are difficult times and you could be experiencing fear, anxiety, or whatever. But start off with that statement and say, see, this is what we are doing at this point of the game to understand. So empathy can also be a part of your written communication. Doesn't always has to be a verbal communication.
So I think what is key is in any messaging that you're doing, you need to know who your audience is. So if specifically you are addressing it to the rural population around your hospital, it probably has to be in the local vernacular language. So doing a fancy video in English may not work in a rural Karnataka or a rural Uttar Pradesh or a rural Punjab. So you have to customize this information to answer what you think is their fear. And again, talking to some of those patients and understanding why they're not coming will help you in understanding that. I think Dr. Animesh has had one more comment about the healthcare communication training, and I do agree with him. What he has suggested is, can we bring different healthcare students together for one place? I think it is very critical for us, especially as doctors, to acknowledge and understand that healthcare delivery is a teamwork. It's like an aeroplane. We may consider ourselves to be a pilot, but unless you have the crew at the back to take care of the passenger, unless you have the guys who load material onto your plane, so it's like a supply chain, guys, unless you have the housekeeping staff to clean it up, your plane is not going to take off. So acknowledge that, realize that we are not God. We are as human as everybody, and we need the entire team to be a part of this. And in every part of communication, I think you need to understand and communicate with that intention in mind. Then a lot of your life will probably become much, much easier to you. I think with that, we've come to the end of the questions that have kind of come. So if there are any other queries that you have, we will be glad to answer it. Otherwise, I hand it back to the QCI team. So Kokila, over to you again.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. Before we end this webinar, on behalf of NBQP, I would like to thank Dr. Murali Kaushik, President Shankara Eye Foundation, for being with us and address the webinar by taking his time out amidst his busy schedule. His address set the tone of this webinar by clearly indicating the importance of communication in medical healthcare. I'm further thankful to Mr. Gokul Ratkonda, speaker of this session, who has been very supportive and has provided valuable contribution in making this webinar a success. At this point, I would like to extend my thanks to Mr. Alok Jain, Director, Training Capacity Building, and Mr. Ranvijay Bihari, Deputy Director in charge, EQUIST, who has been taking promotion initiative relentlessly and working to make this webinar successful. Thanks to IT team for providing this support for this training program. And thank you all QCI team who are involved in this webinar. As I mentioned earlier also, if we are not able to answer your all queries, we have shared our email ID. So please see this slide. Email ID has been shared. So you just you drop an email to us, and we'll try to revert you. We'll definitely not try to, but we'll definitely revert you on the email. Thank you as of now. Be safe, stay safe, and do some yoga, prayers, and meditation to break the anxiety of this lockdown. Bye for now from NBQP team. Thank